Ooh, what's going on, guys? It's Horse Beef here, and I'm bringing you the regularly scheduled programming and back to just like a typical Horse Beef video. Today, I'm going to be showing you my Mount Rushmore of each division in MMA history. Not particularly sticking to UFC. I'm going with all of MMA. So we're talking about Pride, Rizin, but of course, fighters who have fought in lesser organizations their entire careers, of course, won't make it onto a list like this. But this is all encompassing all of MMA, not just keeping it within the confines of UFC. And I don't think I have to explain to you guys what the Mount Rushmore of a weight class means. I'm sure you can come to that conclusion on your own. So let's just get into the first one, being Flyweight. And there we have it. That is my personal Mount Rushmore. Now, I know there is one that may rub people the wrong way that is missing here, and that being Triple C, Henry Cejudo. I just don't think that his resume at 125 is really what puts him in the all-time great conversation for any weight class. It's the work that he did across 125 and 135, right? But I think his resume at 125, aside from the questionable win against DJ, it doesn't really put him on the flyweight Mount Rushmore for me. So it's just not enough. I was going to put him there originally, but I decided to go with Brandon Moreno instead. I feel like the quadrilogy win over Davison Figueiredo is pretty massive, right? Beating Kai Kara-France, which is aging pretty well after he just starched Steve Erceg in the first round. As well as Davison Figueiredo, of course, losing that quadrilogy to Brandon Moreno is a thing to consider here, but I still think he's above Brandon Moreno in the all-time flyweight GOAT discussion. Beat the who's who, has a win over Pantoja, which, aged about as well as a win can really age, in my opinion. And he was just such a goddamn beast during his heyday at 125. And the run that he's on right now at 135 is just strengthening his claim as an all-time great in and of itself. But of course, that doesn't really factor into the 125 discussion. Pantoja, the win streak that he's on right now, beating the who's who currently available at 125. A couple wins over Brandon Moreno, Steve Erceg as well. If he goes and beats Kai Kara-France when they eventually fight, or even Kai Asakura, which has been rumored recently, then I think that would potentially even push Pantoja to the top. Because for me, out of all of these four, Pantoja is the closest to passing Demetrius Johnson right now because of the current run that he's on. But then, of course, you get into Demetrius Johnson, the dominance and the win streak when he was in the UFC, and not to mention the success he had in ONE FC, which is arguably, like, to some people, ONE FC is an even better organization than the UFC at the skill level. I'm not sure if I subscribe to that personally, but Adriano Moraes would do bits in the UFC, I think, and Demetrius Johnson went out there, won the trilogy over him. And he's just one of the all-time greats of MMA in general, let alone flyweight. So that is my Mount Rushmore of 125ers. And then we get into Bantamweight. And this one, I guess, could be a little bit controversial. Dominic Cruz is arguably the greatest Bantamweight of all time. And I don't know if I really have to get too much into that, right? The long win streak, the dominance through WEC. And yeah, the UFC career wasn't as extensive as it could have been, bar injuries and all that. TJ Dillashaw, of course, he has the asterisk next to his name because of the failed drug tests and all that. Peter Yan, arguably he shouldn't even be on here, but, just to be objective, I agree that some people wouldn't put him up here because of some of the recent losses that he's picked up against guys like Merab Dvalishvili. And then the two to Sterling, right? Okay, you listen to me. The second fight against Sterling was razor thin and could have gone either way. I agree, it's not a robbery, but it was razor thin. The first fight, Peter Yan should have been awarded that decision. It should have gone to the scorecards after that illegal blow. Yes, it was a stupid move on Peter Yan's part, and it changed the entire course of MMA history. But I personally count that as a win for Peter Yan, so I don't really give a shit. I'm counting it for him. He has a win over Faber, a very, very impressive win over Corey Sandhagen, and a very impressive, relatively dominant win over Jose Aldo, and beat him to a pulp. Man, it's a great resume that Peter Yan does have, and I feel like a lot of people do ignore that. And then, of course, you get into the recent win over Song Yadong, which is a great win, man. He's always being touted as like the next title challenger, and Peter Yan went out there and looked great against him after a pretty extensive layoff. And then we have Aljamain Sterling, which he might just be the least credentialed champion of all time, or the least respected, and in my opinion it is actually very deserved, because Aljamain Sterling has had an extremely fortunate career. Competitive fight against Cejudo. It honestly could have went Cejudo's way. In my opinion, when I watched it live, I thought it was Cejudo's, although it's not a robbery by any stretch of the imagination. He got TJ Dillashaw with a shoulder injury. I mean, he was fighting a one-armed man and was still struggling to finish him at one point, which is kind of a bad look. And then you have the 2 victories against Peter Yan, which are arguably not victories on either side. I don't know, man. And then to get starched by Sean O'Malley like that, I'm not too sure I really buy into the whole Aljamain Sterling hype and him being like the greatest bantamweight of all time. I just don't see him that way. But I understand, like, some people just look at title defenses and wins and you know the tangible facts, which is of course like really the only way that you can judge these fighters at the end of the day, right? But I just feel like there are so many asterisks, however you say that word pluralized, I'm not sure, beside Aljamain Sterling's name and his record and his resume as a whole, that I know it's not enough to take him off the top 4, because of course if you're talking about the Mount Rushmore of bantamweight, because of the title defenses and the relative dominance, right? And I also forgot about the win over Sandhagen, which was very impressive in and of itself, right? But I just don't really care for Aljamain's legacy that much, and I feel like it's a bit overblown. It's a little bit tainted, and he might just be the luckiest elite fighter of all time, right? To get where he was with the somewhat limited skill set that he actually possesses, in my personal opinion, although I do have respect for his career as a whole. But that is my Mount Rushmore of 135ers. And then we get featherweight. Now this might be the most obvious Mount Rushmore of all of them, although there is a lot of debate as for who's greater than the rest. I mean, Conor McGregor, I guess, is like the black sheep in this whole thing. Like, he's obviously not as great as a 145er as Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, or Volkanovski, right? They've just done a lot more at that weight class. But Conor McGregor still does deserve to be on it because of the title run and starching Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. But there are even other options that could replace Conor McGregor when you actually think about the longevity and the resume, but it would just be a little bit dishonest not to put him there. But when it comes to Jose Aldo, Volkanovski, and Max Holloway, you kind of just have to take your pick, because I think even to this day there are people who stick by their opinion that Jose Aldo is still the greatest 145er of all time. For me, he isn't. I actually do think it is Volkanovski. I know some people put Volkanovski as like a top 5 or within the top 10 of all time, right? Just in general of weight class, but I'm not sure I believe in all that. But Volkanovski, as far as 145ers go, he is probably the best of all time, right? To have a win over Aldo and 3 over Max Holloway, it kind of speaks for itself. Like, to have 4 wins over 2 other guys who are also on the Mount Rushmore is more than enough to say that he's the greatest 145er of all time. And then the second place spot, you kind of just have to, like I said, take your pick between Max Holloway and Jose Aldo. They've both had amazing careers, and while Jose Aldo's best wasn't really in the UFC at 145, it was more in WEC. At the same time, man, you have to factor that in too, and he was so dominant during that time period. And yeah, Conor McGregor is just there because I couldn't think of anyone else. It's either him or Faber, and I picked Conor McGregor. But that is my Mount Rushmore of 145. Let me know if you guys agree with my thoughts on that one. And then we get into 155. Now this is kind of cut and dry for me, right? You could take out maybe a Dustin Poirier and insert, I don't know, maybe BJ Penn or something. But for me, this is just the cut and dry top 4 lightweights of all time, right? Islam Makhachev for me is the best lightweight of all time at this point. I think he surpassed Khabib. The resume of wins and the overall skills too, like just on the eye test, I do believe that Islam Makhachev is a better fighter than Khabib. And despite having 1 loss on the record, he's also fought tougher competition. In my personal opinion, I think so, and just is such a great striker and grappler. Like, he really is the full package, and I know this is really just about greatness, not necessarily about the eye test or skill set, but I just have to say it, man. Islam is so damn good. Khabib, he's up there as well, of course. I mean, and I just have to say, right, based on how these heads are laid out, doesn't indicate any sort of order. So it's not left to right is best to the least great, right? You know what I mean? It's just based on wherever the hell I decided to put them at that time. This has nothing to do with order, but I will make it clear of who I think is the greatest, right, during this video. So I'm sure you guys could have came to that conclusion on your own, but I just want to make it clear because sometimes there is some confusion, and that does spark some outrage in comment sections from irrational viewers. But then again, if you want to leave a negative comment, you're more than welcome to anyway. But yeah, Khabib, of course, he's an all-time great, right? The dominance, the undefeated record, the title defenses, I guess. Yeah, I mean, he won the title off of Ali Quinta, which is insane to me. But the resume, it doesn't really stack up to what his record shows. You know what I mean? Like, the resume isn't that great, in my opinion, right? Gaethje, Poirier, and McGregor, of course, are very, very impressive wins. But other than that, you have Edson Barbosa. Okay. I guess RDA is a very good one too. Okay. Good wins. But they're not great, and yeah, Islam has surpassed him. I would say someone like Dustin Poirier has even surpassed Khabib when it comes to resume, but he is technically below him because of the fact that he's never held undisputed gold and never really defended a belt before. But of course, we know Dustin Poirier is one of the greatest lightweights of all time, some of the nastiest hands we've ever seen in the UFC, and like the recent performance against Islam Makhachev, I think only solidifies him. I know he lost the fight, but he solidified his place on this Mount Rushmore by going toe-to-toe with Islam Makhachev and making it a damn competitive fight, and one that he arguably could have even won if he had a good fifth round and made it to the scorecards, right? Because I'm pretty sure it was 2-2 on a couple of scorecards going into that fifth round. I believe so. I could be wrong there, but let me know. Let me know if you get to this part in the video. If you have the actual facts on that, and I'm incorrect, then feel free. Let me know, please. Charles Oliveira. Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer for me as well. Long storied career in the UFC. Once he went up to 155, he just became a different animal. Finishing guys left, right, and center. Finished Poirier. Finished Gaethje. Beat Tony Ferguson with ease as well. He does have a very good resume, and like even a recent win over Beneil Dariush is very impressive to have too. And like the way he finished him was so impressive. And he's just such a great fighter. On the eye test, he's probably like the second best fighter on this list, but arguably he's actually the least great out of all of them, and arguably he's actually probably like the third on this list. But either way, it doesn't really matter where you put these guys. I'm obviously very biased because I'm such a Dustin Poirier fan. I really am. But I'm just so happy to represent him on this list, and big fan of all these fighters, bar probably Khabib. But at the same time, that is my Mount Rushmore of 155. And as always, you guys let me know what you think in the comments about my placement here. And then we get to 170, and I believe this one is pretty cut and dry as well. I mean, GSP, he is the greatest welterweight of all time, and in my opinion, the greatest MMA fighter of all time. Matt Hughes has an incredible record, incredible resume, with a win over GSP as well, which kind of just solidifies him there, and a win over BJ Penn. So he has wins over all-time greats, and there are more to go along with that too. Tyrone Woodley, I was thinking about maybe not even including him on this list. My bias and love towards Robbie Lawler was almost going to influence my decision to put him on this list over Tyrone, but honestly, man, as much as Tyrone did have a very rough end to his UFC career, when he was at his best, the dude was so dominant and constantly disrespected, and I wasn't going to be the next one to disrespect Tyrone Woodley. So yeah, I had to include him on the list. He was very dominant. The title defenses put him on this list on their own, right? And then Kamaru Usman, of course, he's an all-time great. Arguably the second or third best, right? Depending on if you put Matt Hughes above him. For me, it is kind of a toss-up. It is really kind of a toss-up for me. Usman is arguably above Matt Hughes, though, but there's no way that he ever surpassed GSP. Like, I understand, yes, he had some great wins and lots of title defenses, right? The win over Woodley to win the title was very impressive, very dominant. But to beat Jorge Masvidal 2 times, I mean, it's not a great set of wins, really, right? Like, against Jorge Masvidal, I mean, he was just all hype and just a big cash cow for the UFC at that time. He was never really as good as the UFC and Dana White kind of wanted us to believe he was. 2 wins over Colby that were extremely competitive. So, yeah, that's not the best look in the world, but he still did win those ones, and he finished Colby in the first one as well. But arguably the second one could have been scored as a draw, because for me, Colby won rounds 3, 4, and 5. But yeah, the win over Gilbert Burns was just so impressive. And yeah, he's had a pretty poor streak recently, losing 3 fights in a row, right? 2 to Edwards and 1 to Hamzat. I don't know, man. I don't know if it takes too much away from his overall legacy, but if he continues to fight and continues to lose fights, which I would predict to happen, because I don't think that Usman is anywhere near where he was when he was this like prime Usman, stunning guys with jabs, getting those knockouts, and really just coming out and showing that he is the best welterweight in the world at that time. He's far past that point, and I'm hoping that he doesn't taint his legacy and continue on. But at the same time, he probably will. And if it is to be believed that his knees are in such bad shape like they apparently are, then there's no reason to really believe that he can win many fights going forward against the very, very top, because I just thought he looked so sluggish against against Leon the third time that they fought. But he honestly looked like a new rejuvenated version of himself against Hamzat. So for all I know, maybe he can come out in his next fight and look like the Kamaru Usman of old, but I'm not holding my breath for it. But anyway, that is my Mount Rushmore of 170. And then we get into 185, and this is my Mount Rushmore here. Anderson Silva, Robert Whittaker, Dricus du Plessis, and Israel Adesanya. Now, Anderson Silva is, for me, he's still the greatest middleweight of all time. He has not been surpassed quite yet. I was ready to say that maybe if Izzy became the 3-time middleweight champion and beat Dricus du Plessis over the weekend, that maybe there would be an argument that he's surpassed Silva. But for me, he just hasn't done it yet, and no one has done it yet. I know that Silva's resume isn't the greatest. I know some people would argue that it is one of the greatest, but I don't think that he has one of the best resumes. I think he's in a similar position to that of Khabib, where Khabib was one of the greats because of his dominance and his undefeated record. At the time, Anderson Silva looked unbeatable, and he was making it look easy against the best fighters that were around at that time. But I just think that when you go back and look at his resume, it doesn't hold up quite as well, although it doesn't really have to hold up as well when he was beating guys as easily as he was beating them at that time, you know what I mean? And just stacking up so many title defenses. So, yeah, that speaks for itself for me. Robert Whittaker, another one of the greats, right? Did hold undisputed gold. One of the best resumes, right, in general. He's beaten the who's who at 185 across a couple of different generations at this point, and he just fights whoever they put in front of him, and he tends to win every single time. Dricus du Plessis, 2 wins over guys who are on this Mount Rushmore on their own, right, is for me enough to just put him on this list, although there are others that could make it on here. At the same time, man, I just feel like Dricus du Plessis, like the string of 3 wins that he just put together is just so impressive. Even ones like, I guess, Darren Till finishing him is pretty impressive, I guess, especially at that time. I know Darren Till's fighting in influencer boxing now, and he's just kind of a joke, but he was pretty good at that time when Dricus did beat him. And then he also finished Derek Brunson, who's he's been around for so long, and he's beaten so many guys. I mean, like, it's not a small feat to go out there and finish Derek Brunson, especially the way that he did it. Dricus to me is on the Mount Rushmore now, and Izzy, it does speak for itself. Even though I don't like the guy, I think he's a clown. I think he's classless, and I could say a lot of things about him. I really, really could. He still deserves to be on this list, right? The defenses, the resume, the win streak. You know what I mean? Even like to have a win over Alex Pereira is just another reason to put him on this list. You just simply cannot exclude Izzy from the 185 Mount Rushmore, regardless of your thoughts about him personally. But that is my Mount Rushmore for 185ers. And my 205 Mount Rushmore might just be the most contentious of them all. The first one, of course, the very, very top of it, John Jones. I don't think we're going to get an argument there. Put personal issues to the side, and he really is just the greatest 205er to ever do it. Daniel Cormier, I think it's self-explanatory as well for why he is on this list as well. He's arguably number 2. I would say he probably definitely is number 2. I mean, beat everyone there was to beat at 205 during that time, except for John Jones, of course. Even as a win over Anderson Silva, although it was on short notice, it just strengthens the resume, and it also was at 205 as well. Chuck Liddell speaks for himself for me too. He's very disrespected and I believe forgotten about these days, but he beat everybody around that time. He has wins over Randy Couture, right? Wins over Tito Ortiz, wins over fucking Alistair Overeem, man. When Dana White brought Chuck Liddell to Japan to compete in Pride, and he ended up KOing Alistair Overeem at 205 as well. Right? The man has just had such a storied career, and he just fought too far past his prime. And that's sort of the issue with Chuck Liddell's overall legacy, is that some people, they just focus on the fact that he got knocked out a few times towards the end of his career, but it just isn't enough to take him off this list. I believe the resume of wins on their own are enough to keep Chuck Liddell on here despite tainting his legacy just a little bit towards the end of his career. And Shogun Rua, you listen to me right now, he might be long forgotten about when it comes to the greatest 205ers of all time, but I have not forgot about this absolute juggernaut of a fighter. The man won a Pride Grand Prix and, after being out of his prime, won a UFC light heavyweight title. The man is one of the greatest 205ers of all time. I personally consider a Pride Grand Prix to be more impressive than winning a simple UFC title, right? You fought one time in a night and won a belt, right? Shogun Rua was fighting multiple times in a night to win a Pride Grand Prix, and the year in which he actually won his Pride Grand Prix, that year being 2005, is one of the most legendary years for any MMA fighter of all time. Right, in February, he beats Kanehara by KO. 2 months later, comes back against Quentin Rampage Jackson and brutally TKOs him. 2 months later, comes and beats Rogerio Nogueira as well. And then on the same night, just a few months later, KOs Alistair Overeem, followed by Ricardo Arona, who on his own is a very underrated victory to have on the resume, and that was to win the Pride Grand Prix. Shogun Rua is a certified badass, and the man was just such a beast at that time. If you just don't understand how great Shogun Rua is, I recommend brushing up on the history. I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to go out here and educate you, but if you'd like to go out and educate yourself, then I would definitely urge you to do so, especially when it comes to Shogun Rua, because I feel like he's just so disrespected when it comes to this conversation. But that is my Mount Rushmore for light heavyweight. And I do have to say, though, of course, before I move on to heavyweight, there might be some confusion here, because technically Shogun Rua fought at middleweight, but middleweight in Pride was 205 pounds. So there you guys go. And then we have my heavyweight Mount Rushmore. Now, this one might be a little bit contentious here. I guess it just depends on whether you have Francis Ngannou in this thing or not. You might replace him with maybe a Fabricio Verdum, but I've included Ngannou because I just feel like his resume is so impressive, right? A brutal knockout victory over Stipe Miocic, and just some extremely impressive token wins. Like, I understand that he has a win over Cain Velasquez. It was a little bit strange, but he did finish Cain. Like, it was a pretty nasty, like, short uppercut or short little hook, and then his knees buckled, and I think he just did his knee in a little bit. So it's a weird victory, but he still does have Cain Velasquez, who's on this Mount Rushmore as well. So 2 knockout victories over fighters who were on the Mount Rushmore on their own. It's not the first case in this video for that to be the case, right? And it's just hard to deny him because of that. But then he has a couple of victories over Curtis Blades, who's been in and around title contention for so long. Alistair Overeem as well. He does have a fantastic resume of wins, and especially knockouts. And, you even get into his more recent MMA wins. Ciryl Gane, yes, it was a strange one. Arguably, it should have gone the other way, but he still does have a win over Ciryl Gane. So, yeah, the resume, the knockouts, Francis Ngannou, for me, just has to be on the list. Cain Velasquez kind of speaks for itself, right? He won that trilogy against JDS. Has a win over Brock Lesnar as well, who is such a mammoth of a person. He looked like multiple weight classes bigger than Cain Velasquez, and Cain went out there and just mopped the floor with him, among other great victories as well. Cain Velasquez has to be on this list. And Fedor Emelianenko held the Pride heavyweight title for like 4 years, I believe from 2003 until Pride actually closed down in 2007, and just the multi-year, I think it was like a 9-year unbeaten streak. Yeah, it's just hard to deny Fedor being on the Mount Rushmore of heavyweights. The man was so great, and a great resume to go along with it too. I think some people kind of take away from his resume because he doesn't have a whole lot of names on it for fighters that have fought in the UFC. But when you actually get down to it, man, Ricardo Arona is a great win. Then you have Renato Sobral, you have Heath Herring, you have multiple wins over Antonio Nogueira. You have Gary Goodridge, multiple wins over Mark Coleman. You have Kevin Randleman, who slammed him. That monster slammed Fedor Emelianenko on his head. It looked like he broke his neck, and Fedor Emelianenko did not give a shit. Reverse position and locked in the Kimura. A win over Mirko Cro Cop, man. That was prime Cro Cop as well. This was such a massive fight at that time, and he beat Mirko Cro Cop. Mark Hunt, that crazy win against Hong Man Choi, that absolute behemoth of a human being, got him in an armbar. Tim Sylvia, a prime Andrei Arlovsky. This is when Andrei Arlovsky was on all the horse beef that you could have put together. it was just a nasty punch. And he did start to lose some fights when he signed for Strikeforce, but he was losing, I mean, to like some of the best in the world at that time, right? Antonio Silva, Fabricio Verdum, Dan Henderson. So like they're not the worst names to lose to, but yeah, it does take a little bit away from his overall legacy, right? But at the same time, you just can't deny the multi-year win streak, holding that Pride heavyweight title for 4 years. And as I've already stated, the resume of wins is just so impressive, despite the fact that a lot of people would like to take away from his resume. You just can't really do that. And then Stipe Miocic, it's just self-explanatory, right? He's beaten everybody. A win over Ngannou, wins over Daniel Cormier, won that trilogy there. I would say that in and of itself is enough, because Daniel Cormier is close to even being on the Mount Rushmore of heavyweights. I just couldn't include him because his resume at heavyweight, it's not as impressive as his resume at 205. Although the fact that you can even make the argument that DC should be on this list and Stipe has 2 wins over him is so impressive. Wins over Roy Nelson, Gabriel Gonzaga, Fabio Maldonado is not bad as well. Mark Hunt, Andrei Arlovsky, Fabricio Verdum with that KO, Alistair Overeem, Junior Dos Santos, man. He has such an elite resume. And when it comes to heavyweights, there is no one greater than Stipe Miocic. And that is my Mount Rushmore of heavyweights, people. Now, I'm not leaving you guys after heavyweight, man. I have another little category for you guys. I was kind of juggling between doing like the best open weight fighters of all time and just the best that I didn't include on any of these other Mount Rushmores. So what I decided to do is just doing the best of the rest. And what we have here, we have Alex Pereira. I think what he's done in the short time that he's been in the UFC is nothing short of spectacular. He already is an all-time great. He's solidified himself as an all-time great, and I was considering putting him at 205 in that Mount Rushmore, but he just hasn't done enough at either 185 or 205 to put him up there. But I think when you combine his runs at both 185 and 205, then you have a discussion for him being an all-time great, really. And if he continues what he's been doing, if he goes out there and he claims the heavyweight strap as well, for example, that would arguably even make him the greatest MMA fighter of all time. Randy Couture, multiple time champion in multiple different weight classes, man. 205 and heavyweight. He has won that belt multiple times in both of those weight classes, which is so impressive, and a great resume to go along with it. Vanderlei Silva, I think he went on like a 5-year unbeaten streak, was just the most terrifying guy in Pride as well, has a Pride Grand Prix under his belt, which, like I said, is arguably more impressive to me than having a UFC championship under your belt in and of itself. And then you get into the fact that he was also a Pride middleweight champion. And Dan Henderson, the only fighter in the history of Pride to hold belts in 2 weight classes simultaneously. He was essentially like the original Conor McGregor when you really do think about it. Amazing resume, and just one of the greatest and one of my favorite fighters of all time. And I just wanted to pay respect to these 4 fighters because although they arguably deserve to be represented on their respective Mount Rushmores, I just feel like, despite them missing out, they 100% deserve the mention here, because these are 4 of the all-time greats when you really do get down to it. And it is down to their work across not just one weight class where they may have been great in, but multiple weight classes, which is also impressive and more than deserving and warranting of a spot in this video. But that does conclude my thoughts on the Mount Rushmore in each MMA weight class in the history of MMA. Now, I'd like you guys to let me know in the comment section below what you thought about the video, if you'd like me to cover similar topics going forward, and if you have any ideas in particular. Like I always say, let me know in the comments and I will do my very best to get along to them as soon as possible. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next one.